but you can find that online if you want to listen to what Bex is saying.
I think it's an excellent thing. I think it's probably we've suddenly discovered that we need to start putting protection in place for people. We do need to be. They've been to be really clear about what constitutes harassment, so that people can change their behaviours and actions. That it's not based on a feeling, but it's based on actions and behaviours.
And I think that's really important. Is that it's not the fault of the person who has been harassed or is made to feel uncomfortable. It is the person. Don't harass people. It's really simple. Just don't sexually assault, don't harass, don't do any of those things. It's incumbent on the perpetrator.
Don't bully, don't victimise.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting you raised that point, because I don't know if you remember Anne Robinson, the host of TV's The Weakest Link.
Yes.
Okay. She is in the gun for saying that fragile modern women are unable to deal with workplace sexual harassment, and this was off the back of Theresa May's International Trade Minister asking his secretary to buy sex toys for him, and he called her lewd names. She says, quote, "Now what seems to have happened, the glass ceiling has been shattered, but running alongside that is a sort of fragility amongst women who aren't able to cope with the treachery of the workplace." i.e., why did the secretary agree to run the errands, is what I interpret this as meaning. She's being accused, actually, of victim blaming. What do you think, though, Diane? I suppose I'm asking you first. What do you think of what Anne Robinson's opining here?
Look, I totally disagree. If you have been in a position and where you're powerless and you have somebody in power and your job's dependent on it, or you've got to pay your mortgage and all those, there's a thousand reasons why people don't stand up when they're being harassed, whether it's a bullying harassment or a sexual harassment, and I think we need to do that. People stay in those positions, and when it happens, they become more and more powerless as it goes on to actually stand up. And it's exactly the same as children who are being abused. It's the same behaviours that go on. People feel very disempowered, and often people don't believe them. And frequently, and I have witnessed this, frequently when somebody does stand up and saying something's happened, they're not supported, they're disbelieved, and they're the ones that lose.
Is it strange? Everything. Okay, no, and those points are really well taken. Is it strange, though, to see the well-known women starting to tell their stories of how they regret their shoots with that fashion photographer Terry Richardson, who's finally been dropped by Vogue and Harper's Bazaar after being dogged by allegations of sexual assault for years? I mean, people stay mum. They aren't only the powerless people.
Oh, I agree. And it is, I think it is beholden on all of us to make sure that we do find ways to speak out, and we do find ways to support those who do speak out. I think it's more of the fact of when people have spoken out, they've been not supported and they have been vilified and lost a lot, that other people won't stand up and work with them, and we need to change that culture.
A strange industry bubble, whatever the industry is, seems to exist around that kind of behaviour, doesn't it?
It's not an industry bubble. It's a power bubble. With the Harvey Weinstein case, there were actresses who were too afraid to speak up because they were convinced it would jeopardise their career.
Exactly. Although it's a bit different with the photographer, but I take your point. And that's all the points we've got time for. David Cormack, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.
And Dame Diane Robertson, always a pleasure to have you on as well. Nice to see you, Diane.
Always a pleasure to be here.
All right, and thank you everybody for your company. We're back tomorrow with the panel, and we're standing by for Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, 8 people dead, at least a dozen others injured after a terror attack in New York. We're joined by CNN's correspondent at the scene. Also tonight, 3 people are dead after a 3-car collision on State Highway 1 in Northland. The police inspector who's just attended the accident scene joins us. Labour scraps the 3 strikes law aimed at serious criminal offending. A man accused of murdering 3 family members in South Korea before fleeing to New Zealand appears in court. 4 months after the Nosh grocery chain closed its doors, former workers asked why they're still waiting for their wages and redundancy payments. This after their boss said he'd sell his house to pay them. And the Transalpine Express turns 30.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. The police are extending their investigation worldwide after dismantling the drug syndicate which tried to smuggle $20 million worth of cocaine into Tauranga. After a 5-month joint customs and police investigation, they last night caught 4 foreign nationals red-handed trying to retrieve the drugs from a hidden compartment of a ship from Chile. The Police Assistant Commissioner, Richard Chambers, says this has been the largest single seizure of cocaine in the country, and he expects more arrests to be made.
We will get the help of other law enforcement agencies across the globe, and also customs and police liaison officers offshore, just to look very closely at this syndicate to see what other tentacles they may have elsewhere.
Richard Chambers says 2 Australian men and a Croatian aged in their mid-40s and 1 Serbian national have been remanded in custody after briefly appearing in Tauranga court this afternoon. More details are being revealed about the man responsible for this morning's terrorist attack in New York. 8 people died and 11 were seriously injured by a truck being driven the wrong way down a busy bike path, mowing down pedestrians and cyclists in Lower Manhattan. Police have named the driver as 29-year-old Saifulo Saipov, who moved from Uzbekistan to America 7 years ago. After his truck crashed into a bus, he was shot and injured by police and is in hospital under guard. The CNN's Jim Scuito has the latest.
The suspect left a note either in the truck or around the truck claiming in English that he was carrying out this attack in the name of ISIS. Now, that by itself doesn't mean that it was an ISIS-directed attack. You often have cases where individuals like this are radicalized, and ISIS has encouraged its supporters online to carry out attacks. And when they do, to make some sort of statement, it does show how ISIS is inspiring these kinds of attacks around the world. It is often called on its supporters to use whatever they can to carry out deadly attacks in the West, including specifically vehicles, which, as we saw here tonight, we saw in Barcelona weeks ago, we saw in France, in Nice, France last year. A vehicle by itself is a very deadly weapon.
Jim Scuito reporting there. And the President Donald Trump has ordered the Department of Homeland Security to step up its already strict vetting program for foreigners travelling to the US. A lawyer of a man accused of killing 3 family members in South Korea before fleeing to New Zealand says his client is happy to comply with authorities and be extradited. Sung Kwan Kim, who is 33, appeared in the North Shore District Court today, where a provisional warrant for his arrest was granted so the extradition process could be started. The South Korean police say Sung Kwan Kim's mother and teenage half-brother were found dead of stab wounds in an apartment, and his stepfather's body was found in the boot of a car in a car park. They say Mr. Kim, who is a New Zealand resident, left for New Zealand last week, 2 days after the murders. New Zealand police arrested him on Sunday for a 2015 theft charge. A court was told a man who had the largest collection of child sexual abuse images ever found in New Zealand was driven to offend by an inner demon. Salman Al-Hissanawi, who is 44, was sentenced today in the Wellington District Court and jailed for 5 years. A search of his computers found more than 200,000 still images and over 3,000 videos, which ranged from children posing naked to images of sexual torture and bestiality. The defence lawyer, Jeff Fulton, said his client offended when he was feeling low and said he was driven to offend by a demon inside.
He reported there was a person fighting against him. On further questioning, he said that the demon makes him buy things or do things he doesn't wish to do.
Jeff Fulton said most of the community Al-Hissanawi was part of has now moved, leaving him increasingly socially isolated. A new national cancer agency is to be established to improve care nationwide. The incoming Health Minister, David Clark, confirmed today Labor will go ahead with its pre-election pledge. He says the new body will advise the Drug Buyer Farm Act, but have a wider brief than that agency.
It will set standards and provide clinical leadership. At the moment, there is a postcode lottery of sorts around cancer treatment. It's something that we don't like to talk about as a country, but actually treatment is quite different in different places.
David Clark, the Health Minister. State Highway 1 near Whangarei has just reopened following a crash this morning which killed 3 people. 2 women and a man died when 3 cars and a truck crashed near Oakley. 2 others were injured and are in Whangarei Hospital. And Tonga's rugby league team is urging fans to keep the peace ahead of their clash with the Samoa team on Saturday night after fights between supporters in South Auckland yesterday. The police arrested 4 people last night after a brawl involving Tongan supporters in Otahuhu. A photo of a Tongan supporter burning a Samoan flag was circulated online, adding to the tension. It's exactly 5:05. And further sport, the Black Caps' #1 world ranking in 2020 cricket goes on the line when they begin a 3-match series against India in Delhi overnight. New Zealand currently sit on 125 points, but Pakistan are just 1 point behind after their recent 3-0 series win over Sri Lanka. If India wins the series, Pakistan would move to the top spot. India boasts the top-ranked T20 batsman and bowler in Virat Kohli and pace bowler Jasprit Bumrah. New Zealand's best-ranked batsman is Kane Williamson, while spinner Mitchell Santner is the best-ranked of the bowlers. The Kiwis' new halves partners are in a race against time to get used to each other ahead of their next match against Scotland at the Rugby League World Cup in Christchurch. The North Queensland Cowboys playmaker Tamari Martin will pair up with Sean Johnson for Saturday's game in just his second test. Martin says he needs to make sure he doesn't overcomplicate things when he and Johnson link up.
The coaches and all that kind of stuff have given us a pretty simple game plan, and we just need to stick to that and try to think about what I need to do and what I don't need to do. I don't need to do too much. Sort of try and put a bit of pressure off Sean if I can, and sort of help him out with kicking and organising and all that kind of stuff.
The Kiwis playmaker Tamari Martin. And the New Zealand basketballer Steven Adams has had another strong outing for the Oklahoma City Thunder in the NBA. Adams recorded 14 points and 11 rebounds in the Thunder's 110-91 win over the Milwaukee Bucks. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Ben Robson, mildly cynical secondary school teacher, voices his doubts about the brave new world of technology-based learning. He reckons we're letting the machines do too much of the mental heavy lifting. But isn't that just progress? Which will go nicely with our social media gone wrong thriller, Life After, where our hero Ross Barnes is now an FBI double agent. But what's happened to his wife? On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Time for the short forecast now from Met Service. This takes us through to midnight tomorrow, Thursday. Of course, Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Gisborne, cloudy periods, a few light showers. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumarunui, North Taranaki, fine spells, but the chance of a light shower or two tomorrow afternoon. South Taranaki and Taihape through to Wellington, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine and warm, but isolated showers inland this afternoon and evening. Some possibly heavy. Cloud increases tomorrow evening in those areas. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine for the rest of today. Isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. A few showers tomorrow, turning to rain from the evening with heavy falls about Westland and Fiordland. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine, though isolated showers inland this afternoon and evening. Some heavy with thunderstorms, localised downpours south of Fairlie. Areas of coastal fog south of Timaru in the morning as well. Fine for the Chathams. It's 8 minutes past 5.
Thank you, Paul. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Coming up on the program tonight, the 3 strikes law is out. Over 100 staff still unpaid at Nosh despite a personal promise. That horrific collision on State Highway 1 south of Whangarei, and Jacinda Ardern on CNN. But we begin tonight in New York, where the man named as responsible for a terror attack left a note claiming he did it in the name of IS. 8 people were killed and more than a dozen others injured after a man driving a truck drove into pedestrians and cyclists along a Manhattan bike path just blocks from the World Trade Center. New York police say they found a note in the suspect's rental truck after he'd been shot by police and taken to hospital. Bridget Burke reports.
The aftermath of New York's deadliest terror attack since 9/11. Mangled, flattened bicycles and twisted metal litter a bike path in lower Manhattan after a truck ploughed into pedestrians and cyclists, killing at least 8 and injuring at least a dozen others. New York Police Commissioner James O'Neill said the rented truck was travelling at high speed along the popular cycleway.
The truck collided with a school bus, injuring 2 adults and 2 children. After the collision, the driver of the truck, a 29-year-old male, exited the vehicle brandishing 2 handguns. A uniformed police officer assigned to the 1st Precinct confronted the subject and shot him in the abdomen. The subject was wounded and transported to a local hospital. A paintball gun and a pellet gun were recovered at the scene.
The cycleway runs parallel to the West Side Highway on the edge of Manhattan alongside the Hudson River. It's just blocks away from the World Trade Center. Teenagers Josie Lee and Sophia Lorski watched the attack unfold.
Well, we saw the guy, we saw the car, and it was like surrounded by rubble. And we saw like this, we saw the guy. He looked like he was wearing like dark colors, and I think he had a beard, but he was holding two guns. So it was a little scary. And yeah, we were just wondering like, who's that guy? And we were just told to run in. We were getting really freaked out.
The terrorist, described as a lone wolf, is reported to have moved from Uzbekistan to Florida several years ago.
We were all anticipating like a gunshot at any minute. Well, I was, but you guys probably were too. Like, I was worried that one of us would get shot, like any of us.
Another witness, Walter Wakisa, said the incident was a warning for residents not to become complacent.
I don't know, we've been through 9/11, so, I mean, but now this truck thing and the cars, using cars against people. I mean, I walk up that road every day, to go to wherever, and it's, I mean, you just have to be very, very careful and vigilant all the time. Everybody has to be really alert. Don't look at your cell phones all the time. Anything could happen anytime, I think, That's the world we live in.
Rabbi Chaim Zaklos works nearby.
We hope and pray for the victims and their families and for all those who, witnessed it, and make sure the children, are taken care of course. But remember that, New York is a great place to live, and it's a safe place, and it shouldn't really, God willing, it shouldn't, cause fear or panic. Kids should be able to go about their lives, enjoying their childhoods. So, as a teacher of young children, that's on my mind today.
New York Mayor Bill de Blasio condemned the attack and said it would not break the city's spirit.
It's a very painful day in our city. Horrible tragedy on the West Side. Let me be clear that based on the information we have at this moment, this was an act of terror, and a particularly cowardly act of terror aimed at innocent civilians, aimed at people going about their lives who had no idea of what was about to hit them.
The 29-year-old suspect has been taken into custody and undergone surgery for a gunshot wound to the abdomen. The police investigation is ongoing. For Checkpoint, Bridget Berg.
CNN national correspondent Bryn Gingras is at the scene for the US TV network.
Yeah, I can tell you that, I'm at the foot of the World Trade Center. It is lit up in red, white, and blue. And I'm also just a block away from where this rental truck collided with a school bus and where this terror attack really ended. I can actually still see the truck at the end. In the light of investigators, there are just swarms of police officers at the end of the street of where I am. I actually have been told just recently from sources of mine here on the scene that they had to extend the crime scene even further because they came across some shell casings. Those bullets shot from police officers who, apprehended the suspect. So we're talking about an enormous crime scene, several blocks of New York City that is still under heavy investigation at this point right now.
With all those 9/11 resonances so strikingly, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's just at the foot of where, the reflection pools are, where the new One World Trade Center is. And certainly for people who possibly lived here during that time, it's really upsetting. That's the best way I can describe it. Everyone I've talked to, witnesses who have been on the scene or were on the scene at the time, law enforcement sources of mine that were there just minutes after and were walking along the West Side Highway, seeing bodies. Everyone describes it the same way. They say it's just horror. A lot of people, think about this happening in other cities across the world, these similar type attacks with trucks mowing over people. And, we've seen here in New York, the NYPD put up barricades around major areas like Times Square. But this is an area that, people ride their bikes on. They commute to and from work this path. And right across from it's a high school. I talked to one teenager, a 17-year-old. She was leaving school. Her class had just been dismissed, and she heard the gunshots and ran back in, and she was barricaded in with her classmates until, 3 hours later they weren't able to leave. So there's just a lot of emotion right now. I can tell you that it's Halloween night when this happened. Halloween parade here in New York City. It's a major parade. It happens every year, and it happened was scheduled to go on not far from where this crime scene is. And the city made it a point to continue that parade. And I think that's telling of how people are going to react is we're resilient in this city and we're going to continue on.
Bryn, we so appreciate you being with us, and we know that you have to go back to your proper work, your real job with CNN, but can we ask you briefly about the suspect, this fellow, Sayfullo Saipov, an Uzbeki national? He's been named as the suspect formally by police. This letter that he reportedly left in the truck, what can you tell us about that?
Yes, we know that he left a note inside that rental truck that he really rented just hours before this attack. And on that note, it pledged allegiance to ISIS. We know it was written in English. We also know from witnesses and law enforcement sources that he yelled Allah Akbar when he exited the vehicle. So from the get-go, law enforcement sources were telling us this was an act of terror, but trying to figure out if he was inspired or actually working with a group is still being investigated. At this point, we do hear that he was acting alone, that there's no other threat as part of this, but still so many questions about who this Saipov is. And the good news here that we don't always get to see in these terror attacks is that authorities were able to apprehend him. And when they took him down, they shot him in the stomach. He's alive. He went through surgery, but he's alive. So you can be sure that he will be talking to investigators, or at least they'll be trying to.
It's Bryn Gingras, who was at the scene for CNN. It's 60 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. We head to Northland now, where 3 people are dead after an accident involving 3 cars and a truck near Oakley, south of Whangarei. Just before we came on air, Inspector Wayne Avers told me 6 people were involved in the crash, which happened on a notoriously dangerous stretch of State Highway 1.
The scene was quite horrendous. So about 11:15, we've had 4 vehicles involved in the collision. We've had 3 northbound vehicles and a southbound truck. The first of those northbound vehicles has appeared to cross the centre line, and there's been a head-on collision. The second vehicle has then taken evasive action and driven off the road into the bush on the side of the road. And the truck, as a result of the accident, has lost its steering ability and naturally gone across into the southbound lane, which has impacted with the third vehicle.
Oh my goodness, this sounds absolutely horrific. State Highway 1, so open road speeds we're talking about here, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a 100 km/h area. The first vehicle was spun around and flipped on its side, and it's severely damaged. There's not much left of the vehicle.
How close to the gas station there? I think anyone who knows this area will know that stretch of road. There's mangrove swamps on the seaside, a gas station on the inland side. How close to the gas station are we?
We're probably a kilometre and a half north of the gas station.
Right. And do you, look, we don't want to rush to judge in any way, shape or form, but do you think the northbound car that hit the truck first was overtaking, do you?
Look, we're not quite sure at this stage. We've got various stories, so it will take some time to narrow that down and find out exactly what was happening once we've spoken to all the parties involved.
Three dead. What were they all in the one car, or were they in the first and third car?
So they were in the first and the third car travelling north. So unfortunately the female driver of the first car has lost her life. Her passenger was taken to hospital, what they referred to as status 1, although I understand now that's been downgraded. And the 2 people, a male and a female, travelling in the third vehicle north that's impacted with the truck have both died at the scene, unfortunately.
Absolutely horrific. How's the truckie?
He was listed as status 2 with injuries, and he was taken off to hospital.
Yeah, and he must be shattered beyond any description.
Yeah, so look, 6 people involved in the 4 vehicles, and the one that took evasive action, she has no injuries, but very traumatised, as all of them are that have been involved.
some new seal on this road. There's some work being done through there, isn't there? So in the normal course of events, you would regard this as a reasonably safe stretch of road?
No, look, it is a reasonably safe stretch of road, although it's horrendous for serious and fatal motor accidents between Whangarei and Ruakaka. We've had a number on there, and it's just, you've got to be extreme carefully and drive to the conditions.
And so, as an inspector working this district, what would you love to see most of all changed about that road?
I'm not sure it's the road that needs changing. I think just some of our attitudes to driving, and people just to be take extreme care. You're travelling at 100 kilometres an hour, and you've got vehicles coming at you at 100 kilometres an hour the other way. There's nothing in between, and moments in attention, and you're gone, unfortunately. We try to get to the next of kin as quick as possible for obvious reasons. And look, it's going to be a sad day for them when they've probably said goodbye to loved ones this morning and they're not coming home tonight.
Inspector Wayne Havers, we spoke to him just before we came on air. Coming up on Checkpoint, Labour scraps the 3 strikes law aimed at serious criminal reoffenders. A Lower Hutt man is jailed for 5 years for having the largest collection of child abuse material Internal Affairs has ever seen, and much more. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we are, of course, on Facebook where you can watch us go to air. However you are joining us, thank you for doing so. We turn now to a story of promises made but not kept and work done but not paid for. At the centre of it, a retail chain called Nosh, and well over 100 staff still owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid wages. For those of you who don't know Nosh, it was an upmarket grocery store based in the Upper North Island. The company owned 6 of them, and there were completely independent franchise operations, 2 of which survive. In July, the company went into receivership and the Auckland stores all closed. By that stage, staff and suppliers were already owed significant sums of money. But staff spoken to by Checkpoint say they were personally reassured they would be paid, and some kept working, even helping to pack the stores up. Sharon was head of HR and payroll. She worked in admin at Nosh for 5 years and is owed $14,000 unpaid salary, money she earned and money she needs. But she said there were many staff worse off than her, including couples who both worked at Nosh and lost their entire household income.
I know we've had one couple that's family in Australia had to help them out, to pay their rent. There was Matakana, the girl that her mother and herself were being evicted from their home. They couldn't pay their rent. They had no food. And this is just, 1 or 2 stories that I can tell you, but I can say, well, myself as well. We were all really, I left there in June and I never got paid my 2 weeks that I worked for. These others that never got paid for 2 months. They never got paid, and they were just promised, oh, don't worry, money's coming in, money's coming in. But the money never ever came in.
Sharon, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Who made those promises?
That was John Denise and Andrew Phillips.
Jonathan Denise and Andrew Phillips. Did you ever hear either of them make those promises?
Oh, yes, in meetings. They used to have me, look, they took the business over in February. When they did that, they, called us in support office, and they came up there and then they said, oh, don't worry, you guys don't need to worry, all your jobs are safe, nobody's gonna, be dismissed or anything. Well, that wasn't true because they got rid of some people. Then in the meetings, as time went on, they never paid the suppliers. And, the suppliers started coming into the stores, taking their stock off the shelves and that. And then they promised us in the meeting, oh, don't worry, money's coming in. We've applied by such and such a bank or such and such a place. Money's definitely coming in. John Denise, in one meeting that we were all sitting in with him, the support office staff, he said, in his own words was, even if I have to sell my house, I will do that to save the company.
Did you hear him say that?
Oh, yes. I can actually tell you all the people that was in that meeting.
So you heard him say that you heard him say that he would sell his own home to pay the bills and to pay the staff?
Yep, that's it. And Andrew Phillips was there, and Andrew Phillips still patted him on the back, you know, and was like, oh, yeah, you know, you'll do that. So at that stage, we were still quite confident that, that we'll still get paid.
So that's why, now, I need you to tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, and you need to correct me if I'm wrong in any way, but is that why people stayed on even after the shops were closed, even after there was no revenue, nothing coming into the tills, because they had been made promises by the bosses?
Yep, they were promising all the time. All the time they were promising money is coming in, money is coming in. They've got these people, or they applied by this bank, or, oh, money is coming in. But the money just never came in. So that's basically it, John. Like, you know, I just feel so sorry for those poor people out there, because we had the majority is young, you know, like young people, couples, and the generation was mostly youngsters. Well, the support office was more like older people and that. But I just felt so sorry for the store staff, like really.
Why are you speaking up?
Because I just feel that it's not fair what they can do. Because John Denise has been declared bankrupt twice before, and how can he come and just do this and make promises to people, and he doesn't do this? It's not just for myself, it's for the others as well.
That's Sharon, a former NOSH worker, owed $14,000. Now, Damien Grant is the receiver. He listened to Sharon speaking to us, and we asked Damien about this Jonathan Denise man, the man Sharon said had staked his house on the fact that staff would be paid.
It's unclear exactly what his role in the business was. So him coming in there, he is potentially putting himself in the position of a director. He may well have opened himself up to some liability there. That's really, I'm the receiver. There's a liquidator in charge of this company, chap by the name of Digby Noyce. So that's more of an issue legally for him than for me.
Absolutely, and I absolutely understand the receiver's role, and I also understand that you come in after the fact, so you weren't involved in any of this stuff. But if John Denise told a meeting of people that he would stake his house on financially supporting them, is that something that the receiver and or the liquidator can consider moving on? Is there a kind of verbal contract there, or is it not that simple?
He doesn't own a house.
He doesn't own a house.
There is a property that it's held and trusted. That is an issue that we have looked at. But John Denise does not own a house, so there is no. He was offering a guarantee, but there was nothing behind that guarantee.
So roughly 100 staff are owed wages. How many? Do you know the exact number?
I would have that information, but not to hand. But I think it's slightly more than 100. A lot of the staff, though, I think there was about 80 full-time staff and about another 20 to 30 part-time staff. And it was quite a lot of money that was outstanding as well. Several $100,000 of holiday pay, unpaid wages, accumulated leave, that sort of stuff. So it was pretty big dollar values.
And how much of that on a cents per dollar basis are they going to get?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
There's no recovery. When we were appointed by Andrew Phillips, who was the director who had advanced $800,000 into the business. He will lose almost all of that himself. I should caveat that Andrew Phillips is my client, so I'm not a liquidator. I'm not necessarily an objective observer here, but he came in on good faith. He put in about $800,000 of his own money, and he was given several undertakings from the gentleman that you've previous caller was discussing.
Jonathan Denise. So the same sort of big talking that was persuading the staff to stay on and work even when there was no revenue coming in any longer, that Andrew Phillips was also receiving similar kind of assurances from Jonathan Denise, was he?
Yes, he was. And that was why... So Phillips is a established, competent business guy in Australia, saw an opportunity, was given some assurances, and his money went... A fair chunk of his money actually went to paying staff prior to receivership, and as well as to help pay for the acquisition of the business from Veritas. And so he's, of all of the people who've lost money here, he has lost by far the most.
What's Jonathan Denise's track record? What are his other businesses? How have they gone?
Well, I'm not an expert in Jonathan Denise, although I've had a number of dealings with him. He's certainly an interesting individual. I mean, he's been in the hands of the official assignee twice before.
Sorry to interrupt there, but the shorthand for that is that he's been bankrupted twice before, right?
Yes, that's correct. And look, that's a matter of public record. So most of the other people, so we're talking about Veritas and Phillips. I mean, this is information that they would have access to, or the ability to gain access to. It's a bit difficult for the staff, of course, because they probably would not necessarily have known that, or necessarily have the ability.
No, that's right. No, that's right. I mean, you're earning $16 or $70 an hour working on the floor, and you're not going to do due diligence on Jonathan Denise, are you?
No, you're not. No.
That's Damien Grant, the receiver. So promises were made, guarantees given, and the man Sharon and other staff members named was Jonathan Denise. What does he say to the staff who believed him, who are still unpaid for their work and, in at least one case, lost their home? We called him.
Hello.
Jonathan, it's John Campbell from Radio New Zealand. How are you going?
Good.
Good. Look, I'm just phoning you about the position of the staff at NOSH, over 100 of whom... That was our attempt to get hold of Jonathan Denise. We tried again calling from the same number immediately, and this time no one answered. If you have had dealings with them, or if you are part of the NOSH workforce still waiting for your outstanding wages due, please get in contact, or on any of the subjects we're covering tonight. If you have feedback, text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It's a little bit after 5:30, so Paul Brennan, take it away with the headlines.
Thank you, John. In our headlines at this time, the police are extending their investigation worldwide after dismantling the drug syndicate which tried to smuggle $20 million worth of cocaine into Tauranga. A 5-month investigation led police and customs agents to intercept 4 foreign nationals last night trying to retrieve the drugs from a hidden compartment of a ship from Chile. The police say this has been the largest single seizure of cocaine in the country. The man who drove a rented truck into cyclists and pedestrians in New York, killing 8 people, is tonight under police guard in hospital. 11 people were also injured in the attack, which a note written by the man says was inspired by Islamic State. 29-year-old Sayfullo Saipov, who moved from Uzbekistan to America 7 years ago, drove his truck down a cycle path at high speed before crashing and being shot by police. A lawyer of a man accused of killing 3 family members in South Korea before fleeing to New Zealand says his client is happy to be extradited. 33-year-old Sung Kwan Kim has appeared in the North Shore District Court today. The South Korean police say Kim's mother and teenage half-brother were found dead of stab wounds in an apartment, and his stepfather's body was found in the boot of a car. And a court has heard how a man who had the largest collection of child sexual abuse images ever found in New Zealand was driven to offend by an inner demon. Salman Al-His Sanawi, who is 44, was sentenced today in the Wellington District Court, jailed for 5 years. A search of his computers found more than 200,000 still images and over 3,000 videos, which range from children posing naked to images of sexual torture and bestiality. And Northland Police are begging drivers to respect a notorious stretch of State Highway 1 after a fatal 3-vehicle crash today. The region's traffic police say a car heading north crossed the centre line just south of Oakley and hit an oncoming light truck late this morning. The truck then lost its steering and hit another car, and 3 people died and 2 were injured. Those are the headlines. Our next news and sport update will be at 6.
Which is exactly 25 minutes away. Coming up next, our business editor, Giles Beckford. But before that, a question. Has the horse already bolted when it comes to trying to rein in the property market? Now, the new government announced yesterday that it would move to stop overseas buyers from purchasing existing homes. They're still welcome to build new ones. Residents qualify, of course. The Aussies are exempt. They can do what they want. So are wealthy overseas buyers snapping up houses by the dozen while they still can? And are locals now holding off buying in the hopes that the market and prices will drop? Bridget Mills went to find out.
On the left is 610, first call, 610, second call, 620.
It's Wednesday, auction day, and if you've ever bought or sold a home at auction, you'll know how tense the atmosphere in these large conference rooms can be. At this morning's Barfoot & Thompson offices in central Auckland, 23 houses went under the hammer, and there were another 25 in the afternoon. Properties range from large glass-fronted multi-million-dollar homes to solid brick units, which are considered more affordable, by Auckland standards at least.
760. I call. You back here?
The room isn't full. People enter and leave as each property goes up on the block. It's a multicultural mix of buyers and sellers. But who are New Zealand citizens and who are from overseas?
Well, yeah, hard to tell. People come from all walks of life, and so it's very difficult unless you actually ask for a passport in the actual auction room. So, yeah, can't tell you.
That's Barfoot & Thompson's man in charge of auctions, Campbell. There are no actual statistics on where buyers come from, so how much of an impact foreigners have on the property market isn't known. And Mr Danoon says it's too early to tell what effect the new government's foreign buyers ban, which it hopes will come into force early next year, will have.
All I know, speaking as an Australian who's been living here 12 years, it's had hardly any effect at all in Australia, nationwide. So at this stage, I'm not optimistic it will have a huge effect, but it's too early.
Karen Kubray and Morris Western walk out of the auction having just bought their first home together. It's taken a year of open homes, hard work and research to get to this day.
The feedback we're getting from agents is that there has probably been a bit more interest quite suddenly in purchasing. So I think from that point of view it's had an impact. I think people are really becoming aware of what the changes will be, so they're doing a bit of a mass buy at the moment.
In terms of your property you bought today, what was the competition like in there for you?
Well, there were 6 registered bidders for our property.
Yeah.
So some in person, some on the phone, which seemed to be, the agents seem to be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, so I think that's fairly common. The auctions we've been to, there have been multiple bidders. Yeah.
And it's always hard to tell if someone is from here or from overseas, but have you found out for sure whether that's the case?
We've seen overseas bidders and non-overseas bidders, and there's been phone bidders, so we don't know where they're from.
Mark Jack left the auction empty-handed. He's looking to buy an investment property, but he's decided to hold off for a few months to see if prices drop.
We've been looking for about a year and a half, 2 years, but we've always felt the market was going to come down, and it has significantly, but I think it's probably got a way to go now that Labour's put in a new policy.
Craig Susu and his wife have just sold their first family home.
Even 48 hours after they announced it, we still had 3 people that were interested in buying the house and around the price that we expected to sell for, so certainly it didn't scare them off.
And where were those 3 keen buyers from?
They were all Kiwis. Yeah, they're all Kiwis. So we had a bit of a mixture coming through the open homes, but in the end we had a young couple that wanted to move from another suburb, Kiwi couple that wanted to move from another suburb, a young Kiwi couple professionals and some renters that were also Kiwis who lived in the neighbourhood.
So the looming threat of a ban on overseas buyers didn't affect that sale. And as Campbell makes clear, that's also the case for the wider property market at the moment.
we have no evidence to suggest it's affected anything. But if we speak in 6 months, I might have a different story.
Which seems like a good idea. So once the usual heat of the summer housing market has been and gone and the new legislation is in place, we'll report back. Mō te hōtaka o te Yahihahi, ko Bridget Mills tēnei.
And we will hold you to that report, Bridget. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Wellington now, where we're joined by our business editor, Giles Beckford. Hi, Giles. Labour market numbers, they seem to be even better than you were suggesting they would be last week.
Indeed, John, they are really strong. Unemployment near a 9-year low, record numbers of jobs being created, record numbers of people in work, surging wage rates, as they say in the scam busters. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Now, this is Stats New Zealand, so of course we believe their numbers, but with a pinch or two of salt. These labour market numbers are often volatile and leave themselves open to various interpretations and lots of revisions. So we smooth it out, I think, is probably the important thing. And we might have to say that we didn't create 56,000, the economy didn't create 56,000 jobs in the past 3 months, but perhaps in the past 6 months there may have been around 50-odd thousand jobs created, and that gives you an employment growth of around 1%. There's no doubting, though, that the labour market has got a little bit tighter, that there are still reasonable numbers of jobs being created, and this is in building sector, in the services, hospitality, retail sectors. They're all quite strong employers, and we might see a little bit more of that coming into the summer season, the holiday season. But there are those who are questioning whether we can sustain this degree of strength in the labour market, and that will probably start to manifest itself next year. Certainly the wages side of the numbers that we saw today, 1.9% was the annual growth rate in the sort of benchmark wages indicator. A part of that, as we said on Friday, was the equal pay settlement for the rest home sector. Take that out, and the wages rate actually went back a little bit. It slowed on the previous quarter. So there's still no great underlying impulse there in wage inflation. Having said that, as we were commenting last week, these numbers do start to take on a little bit more importance and will attract more attention as the Reserve Bank has to take them into account formally, in a formal sense, with the new writing instructions from the government. So we'll wait and see how that pans out. But for the time being, not too bad. We'll wait and see whether that continues for 2018.
A big clean out on the share market today, Giles. What happened and why?
Well, normally we would just do a quick, and here's the markets. But the share market at one stage was down 1.3%, more than 100 points. And that's a considerable clean out in anybody's reckoning. It was the biggest in months. It's closed down 92 points, just over 1%, 8,053 for the top 50 index. The main reason why was A2 milk. Now, that's been a big driver of the market in the past month. A2 milk, in fact, has been up somewhere in the region of 20-odd%, in fact, 30-odd% so far this month. And that's been behind the rally for the main market. There was a turn in sentiment. An Australian broker had put out a report saying they think it was overblown, that it will be, in fact, an underperformer. One of the reasons why A2 milk's been so popular, and with it the supplier and maker of its milk powder, Synlait Milk, which is the South Island dairy company, is because they've got favoured status in China, which is one of their key markets. They've got the necessary certification, so their prospects there look very good. But a dose of reality had to come, and today seems to have been it. It was down 12% at one stage. A2 milk closed today down about 8.5%, but still a little bit of reckoning there, a little dose of reality. Also more weakness for Fletcher Building and Metro Glass, two stocks in the building sector who are well and truly out of favour. The currency, on the other hand, which had been on the back foot because of political uncertainty in the past couple of weeks, it perked up after those jobs numbers. I think essentially because investors overseas, the reef fish of the foreign currency markets, as David Longy would have called them, they're now betting that perhaps the Reserve Bank may have to take action, start tightening rates a little sooner than had been expected. The result of that is the Kiwi dollar gaining around 0.5 cent on the day, just touching 69 US cents and 89 Australian. In fact, 90 Australian, I should say, not 89.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Thanks very much indeed, Giles. The three strikes law aimed at serious criminal reoffenders will be scrapped by the Labor-led government. Under the Sentencing and Parole Reform Act 2010, repeat violent offenders face serving the full sentence for their third offence without the possibility of parole. There are 40 qualifying major violent and sexual offences, including murder, attempted murder, manslaughter, sexual violation, abduction, kidnapping and aggravated robbery. What's happening now? Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The three strikes law was introduced under the national government, but it was a policy promoted by its governing support partner Act. The intention was to create a regime under which serious and violent criminals faced longer sentences if they continued to reoffend. The Justice Minister Andrew Little says the law has not successfully reduced serious crime.
It comes from that climate or that era where everybody talked about getting tough on crime and making laws and looking like things were getting harsher and harsher, but actually it's not doing anything.
Nor, he says, has it acted as a deterrent.
Hardcore criminals, when they are offending, aren't going about calculating what might happen as a consequence. And if you have a look at it 8 years on, there's, I think, 2 offenders are on a third strike warning, which tells you that actually the judges, the courts, the lawyers, everybody is actually just trying to avoid this law because nobody thinks that it works.
The ACT leader David Seymour says it's a disappointing decision.
To abandon a policy without evidence, it's a triumph of ideology over the facts because there's no commitment to look at the facts here. They just want it gone, even though early suggestions are it was working. Number 2, it is a shame for the families of those victims of violent and sexual offences to know that these people are effectively going to be given a clean slate.
He disagrees. It's had no impact. Mr Seymour says there are 2 offenders facing a third strike and many more coming up behind them.
132 people have had a second strike offence where they've been given a longer sentence for particularly grievous crimes. So it has been working to incapacitate criminals and get them off the streets.
When he was 18, Cyrus Ormsby was sentenced to 4.5 years prison for vehicular manslaughter when a young woman died in the car he was driving. He was speeding and there was alcohol involved. While in the medium to high security Waikeria prison, he received another similar length sentence as his second strike for an assault he insists he was not responsible for. His mother Paula says she's terrified another incident in prison could lead to his third strike.
He's living in fear because of the conditions that he's in within prison. Anything could go down at any time. If an incident occurred and he needed to protect himself and he was found guilty or in any way of a violence charge, my son just doesn't go home. He was 18 when he went in. The system would claim him and he just wouldn't come home.
She says no one's excusing his actions for the first offence, but he should not be subject to the 3 strikes provisions.
Myself and my family were completely naive. I had complete faith in the system. When he first went in, he owned what he did. He did early guilty pleas, all of those things. You know, he deserved what he got. So the impact for us as a family was absolutely huge. Second strike, we just couldn't believe.
She welcomes the signal from Labor about the law change.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think somebody's going to reoffend, they will reoffend. So this is an opportunity for those that have to actually turn their lives around.
The Justice Minister Andrew Little says the government intends to take a different approach to the justice system and the treatment of offenders, and part of that will be the repeal of the 3 strikes law mid to late next year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
12 to 6. A man accused of murdering 3 family members in South Korea before fleeing to New Zealand last week can now be named. 33-year-old Sung Kwan Kim appeared in the North Shore District Court today where a provisional warrant for his arrest was granted. Our reporter Sally Murphy was there.
The South Korean police say the bodies of Sung Kwan Kim's mother and 14-year-old half-brother were found with stab wounds in an apartment, and his stepfather's body was found in the boot of a parked rental car. They say he left for New Zealand on Monday last week, 2 days after the killings. New Zealand police arrested him on Sunday for a 2015 theft charge and on Monday confirmed the Crown had received a request from South Korea to prepare an arrest warrant so he could be extradited. Mr Kim, who is a New Zealand resident, kept his head down during his court appearance this afternoon. The Crown prosecutor, Emma Hoskin, asked Justice Neven Dawson to consider a provisional arrest warrant which would enable the extradition process to begin.
Firstly, Your Honour, the charges are obviously of the utmost seriousness. Secondly, he has demonstrated that he has the means, the ability and the willingness to travel at short notice across the world. Applicant says that given the nature of these offences, there must be some concern for public safety.
Ms Hoskins says there is a warrant for Mr Kim's arrest in South Korea, which has been authorised by a judge there.
Mr Kim is clearly in New Zealand. He is an extraditable person in relation to an extraditable country, and the charges are extradition offences. In terms of the fourth and final ground, it is the applicant's submission that it is both necessary and desirable that a provisional arrest warrant be issued.
Justice Neven Dawson granted the request. Members of the South Korean consulate were in court today. The New Zealand Herald reported that the consulate was alerted to Mr Kim's whereabouts after an eagle-eyed neighbour spotted the suspect moving into an Auckland home last week and recognised him from Korean social media reports about the murders. Crown Law says it's now waiting for a formal extradition request from South Korea. While in court today, Mr Kim pleaded guilty to the theft charge. He's charged with stealing a fridge, freezer, microwave and washing machine in 2015. He will appear in court next month for sentencing on that charge. At the North Shore District Court for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Images of babies and preschoolers being sexually abused and a handbook for pedophiles were among the material found on the computers of a Lower Hutt man jailed for making and trading child porn. The biggest collection ever found in New Zealand was discovered after several complaints were made to Internal Affairs in 2015 about a New Zealander uploading child sexual abuse material. Salman Al-Hissanawi, who was 44, was sentenced today in the Wellington District Court and jailed for 5 years on 8 representative charges, including making and distributing objectionable material. Our court reporter Anne-Marie May filed this report.
Internal Affairs inspectors found Salman Al-Hissanawi had over 200,000 still images of child sexual abuse, along with thousands of videos of similar material, most of which was stored on cloud-based accounts around the world. It was the biggest collection ever found in New Zealand. The charge of producing objectionable material related to Al-Hissanawi's compilation of what he had available to trade, and there was no suggestion he had sexual contact with children. The sentencing judge Ian Mill described Al-Hissanawi's handbook.
This described methods and techniques in relation to the pursuit of children for sexual gratification, chapters on security, methods and various aspects to avoid being caught.
Judge Mill said the material distributed by Al-Hissanawi ranged from images and movies of children posing naked through to images of children as victims of sexual torture and bestiality. The defence lawyer Jeff Fulton said his client had offended when he was feeling low and he was driven to offend by a demon inside him.
He reported there was a person fighting against him. On further questioning, he said that the demon makes him buy things or do things he doesn't wish to do.
Mr Fulton said Al-Hissanawi had been part of a community of refugees when he first came to New Zealand, but most of them had now moved, leaving him increasingly socially isolated. Judge Mills said some of the abused children shown in the publications had since been identified in the United States, including one girl who is now 19.
Has to live with horrible knowledge, someone somewhere, watching the most terrifying moments of her life, taking grotesque pleasure in them. The enormity of the circulation which is possible through the internet only serves to add to her grief and pain, and it sickens her to the core and terrifies her.
Judge Mill ordered that all the material seized be destroyed and that Al-Hissanawi forfeit his computers and other devices. Al-Hissanawi will be placed on the Child Sex Offenders Register. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Time could be up for a bowling club in the capital, with the council considering installing a dog training school on the site after complaints of rowdiness. The Newtown Working Men's Bowling Club's lease is almost up, and the WCC says there have been complaints over alcohol breaches and noise. Charlie Drever reports.
The Newtown Working Men's Bowls Club owns its building, but it sits on town belt land.
Wellington City Council's Park, Sport and Recreation Manager Paul Adams says the club's activities have breached rules and annoyed neighbours.
The club runs a successful bar, which is quite popular with some people in the local community. Often the club is in breach of its liquor licence, and they also hold a number of functions there that from time to time there are noise complaints from the community about the activities at the club.
Paul Adams says the club's viability is also in doubt, as it only has 10 permanent and 6 honorary members. He says a potential amalgamation with the nearby Newtown Bowls Club could be an option, but a member of the Working Men's Bowls Club, Piers Wall, says the council is deliberately ignoring the club's other users.
The issue here has been that there's been lots of people that turn up and play casually that have never been under an expectation to join as a member. So when we went out there and sort of did a bit of a membership drive for all those casual players, we've had about 300 people join up to the club.
Mr Wall, who's in his late 20s, says the greenskeeper and secretary work hard to make sure functions don't get out of control. He says all sorts of people use the facility.
We had sort of an open day 3 weeks ago where we had a bunch of families, we had a group of people around my age. Obviously the regulars are a bit older, but there was a real cross-section. It was great to see kids running across the greens and having a go.
Nevertheless, the council is looking for other tenants for the site. One is the Central All Breeds Dog Training School, which is currently based in Arrow Valley. It's in danger of losing its venue because Victoria University, which owns the land, is considering selling it. The school's president, Rachel Hamilton-Williams, says of the 10 or so options the school has looked at, the bowling club was one of the better options.
There are some considerations for us as what might be the implications. But in terms of it's a lovely big building and it's got some lovely big bits of grass out the front of it and it's right next to a dog walking area, it's pretty good.
But Rachel Hamilton-Williams says it puts the dog training school in an awkward position.
We don't want to be the people who kicked out the bowling club. The Arrow Valley will vouch for us that we're nice people to have around. We're not bad custodians of an area. But obviously you don't want to be seen as literally the people who kicked out a well-loved thing.
She says the school had previously approached the Bowls Club about sharing the site but was told it wasn't possible. In the meantime, the council says it will continue working with the Bowls Club about their concerns, but says a last-minute reprieve is unlikely. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
This month, one of New Zealand's most treasured trains turns 30. The Transalpine Express is renowned worldwide for its stunning scenery as it cuts and weaves through the Southern Alps between Christchurch and Greymouth. Several of the original staff were on the train today for a special trip, and so was our reporter, Logan Church.
Welcomed by a string quartet at Addington Station in Christchurch, the men and women who had a vision for a single Alpine rail service boarded the Transalpine Express for a special trip to Greymouth. Among them was the train's first manager, Bob Ewing.
We were as green as grass. On the first day, everything went right on the day. We had helicopters flying beside us full of journalists filming us through the Waimak Gorge. I think we got 7 minutes national coverage on the television and 12 minutes local. They had local programs in those days. It was a new ball game.
The 223-kilometre journey takes about 5 hours, passing through deep valleys and some of the country's most beautiful landscapes. It started as a converted passenger train and quickly increased in popularity. 30 years on, it's been crowned by international media as one of the most scenic rail journeys in the world. Gary Kelly drove the train in the late 90s and says it was an incredible experience.
I used to have several people in different places, used to toot the old whistle to it, on the South Road, North Road, the West Road, everywhere. Used to, one woman used to call me the horny engine driver. Yeah, it was good.
Is that a name you're proud of?
Yes, I am. Yes, no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, made a lot of friends. Yeah, made a lot of friends.
Today's journey is not only a birthday celebration, it's also a celebration of the train's survival. Earlier this year, the train was forced out of action for several weeks after a fire tore through some of the track, bridges and signal systems near Springfield. But the route was repaired, and as the train started climbing into the Southern Alps today, I spoke to the man who's responsible for the original vision, John Bennett. He says it wasn't easy to establish the service.
Rail had no credibility at that point. That was the big battle, and that's what we had to set out to achieve. What we really wanted was to make sure the Transalpine was something that visitors to Christchurch would use, and that's really what's happened.
30 years later, and he still believes rail is the future of transportation.
We've seen big rigs on the road and what they do to our roads and how the motorists have to put up with it. I think if we could get our act together, rail's definitely got to be one of the key components.
In the year to June 2017, over 100,000 people travelled on the Transalpine Express, a journey Bob Ewing hopes they will remember forever.
And I always remember they say to him, what do you think of all these people on the train today? I said, well, in 50 years' time they'll still remember the day they travelled on the Transalpine.
On the Transalpine Express for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Now, if you were watching that, you will have seen beautiful pictures. If you were listening, it was accompanied by great views, some lovely editing, some really fun pictures. All of the work was done by Logan Church himself. Logan is just a year or so out of Christchurch Broadcasting School. He shot that story, he edited that story, he reported on that story, did a live cross into Morning Report this morning. And Logan, we just want to say you are an outstanding addition to our team. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Kia ora, good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The man who drove a rented truck into cyclists and pedestrians in New York, killing 8 people, is under police guard in hospital. New York police have named 29-year-old Sayfullo Saipov as the attacker and say he moved from Uzbekistan to America in 2010. He was shot by police as he left his vehicle carrying 2 imitation guns. The police say he was shot in the stomach and has serious but non-life-threatening injuries. US media reports say a note was found in the truck referring to the Islamic State group. The BBC's John Sopel assesses the questions now facing intelligence services.
The FBI, in cooperation with friendly nations, will be doing their utmost to try to find out the maximum they can about this person, what his last movements were, who he's last been in contact with. There'll be absolute determination that they find out everything, and I'm sure an FBI field office, a special investigation team, is already up and running, and State Department people will be looking at when he came from Uzbekistan, who he knew in Uzbekistan. This will be a multi-agency investigation, and it will be involving hundreds of people, you can be absolutely sure.
John Sopel in Washington. Authorities say they have dismantled the drug syndicate which tried to smuggle $20 million worth of cocaine into Tauranga last night. After a 5-month joint customs and police investigation, 4 foreign nationals were caught red-handed trying to retrieve the drugs from a hidden compartment on a ship from Chile. 2 Australian men, a Croatian and a Serbian, were remanded in custody after briefly appearing in Tauranga court today. The Police Assistant Commissioner, Richard Chambers, says it's the largest single seizure of cocaine in the country and he expects more arrests. He says they'll be working with international agencies to check any other influences the drug syndicate may have. A man has been jailed for 5 years after the largest collection of child sexual abuse images ever found in New Zealand was discovered on his computer. Salman Al-Hisnawi, who is 44, was sentenced in the Wellington District Court and jailed for 5 years on 8 charges, including making and distributing objectionable publications. His computers contain more than 200,000 still images and more than 3,000 videos, including ones featuring children being sexually tortured and forced into bestiality. Judge Mills said some of the children have since been identified in the United States. He read from a letter from one girl who is now 19 and spoke of the ongoing traumatic effects of the abuse.
Someone somewhere watching the most terrifying moments of her life, taking grotesque pleasure in them. The enormity of the circulation which is possible through the internet only serves to add to her grief and pain.
Judge Mill ordered the material found destroyed and that Salman Al-Hisnawi must forfeit his computers. More than 100 staff who worked for the high-end Auckland grocery chain Nosh are still owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid wages, despite being promised they would get their money. The company that owns 6 of the franchised stores went into receivership in July, owing staff and suppliers significant amounts. The staff say they were told by one of the directors, Jonathan Denise, that he had staked his house on the fact their wages would be paid. But the receiver, Damien Grant, has told Checkpoint Mr Denise does not actually own a house.
There is a property that it's held and trusted. That is an issue that we have looked at, but John Denise does not own a house. So he was offering a guarantee, but there was nothing behind that guarantee.
Damien Grant, the receiver appointed to Nosh. Up to 70 Auckland restaurants will be visited by the Labour Inspectorate before the end of the year to make sure there are no employment breaches. The owner of 3 Asian restaurants has been ordered to pay nearly $200,000 in arrears, failing to pay minimum wage and correct holiday pay. The Labour Inspectorate Regional Manager, David Milne, says more restaurants will be visited in the crackdown.
A lot of part-time workers, students gravitating away from end of year, from finishing university, will be looking for part-time work. And we want to ensure that those students and workers who actually are in part-time work actually receive their entitlements are treated properly.
David Milne says businesses that don't pay workers their entitlements are anti-competitive. Australia's Immigration Minister has accused refugee advocates of being misleading about the situation on Papua New Guinea's Manus Island. Peter Dutton's comment follows the official closure of Australia's offshore processing centre on Manus, with about 600 refugees refusing to leave. The men say they fear for their safety if they go to new locations in the island's main town and have barricaded themselves inside the centre despite power, food and water supplies being cut off. Mr Dutton criticised refugee advocates, saying they have long claimed the Manus Centre was a hellhole, but the moment it was to be closed, they demanded it be kept open. Police in Northland are begging drivers to respect a notorious stretch of State Highway 1 after a fatal 3-vehicle crash late this morning. The region's Traffic Police Chief, Wayne Avis, says a car heading north crossed the centre line just south of Oakley and hit an oncoming truck which lost its steering and hit another car. 3 people died and 2 were injured. Chief Inspector Avis says all police can do is repeat their message for people to pay attention and drive to the conditions.
You know, that's all we ask. It's this piece of road, State Highway 1 south of Whangarei, is notorious for serious accidents. It's 100 kilometres an hour, so we just ask that people take extreme care on it.
It's going to be weird.
There. The crash closed the state highway south of Whangarei for 5 hours and trucks were forced to wait after one rolled over a bank on the detour route. It's 6:05. On to sport now. Former Silver Ferns veteran Laura Langman is returning to New Zealand after being granted a release from her 2018 contract with the Sunshine Coast Lightning. Langman joined the Lightning last year, making her ineligible for the Silver Ferns under Netball New Zealand's rules. The 31-year-old says she's stepping away from netball to focus on family and travel. Unwanted All Blacks winger Julian Savea admits it's going to be strange playing against his brother Ardie for the first time since they were children. Julian's expected to start on the wing for the Barbarians in this weekend's match against the All Blacks at Twickenham. His brother and Hurricanes teammate Ardie will likely feature in New Zealand's lineup for the match, the All Blacks' first end-of-year tour. Julian says the last time he and Ardie played against each other was on the family carpet as kids.
It's going to be weird coming up against Ards. He obviously beat me to play with the Barbarians as well, so he was part of this team 2 years ago. So this will be pretty cool.
Julian Savea there. And the Los Angeles Dodgers have won Game 6 of Major League Baseball's World Series 3-1 over Houston Astros to send the series to the 7th and deciding match. That's the news.
A pump explodes.
Mum heard a bang and I said, oh my God, and I jumped. Mum jumped as well and Blake barked, as he would.
Tensions rise.
It's shameful that Australia is not prepared to take any of them, but there needs to be a resolution. Some country in this region has to show humanity.
And fans erupt.
Why is Jason Taumalolo your favourite player?
He makes me this was, and he sends our t-shirt. He's related to our cousin.
Breaking through, Guy and Espinner and Susie Ferguson Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Take 10, a local initiative dealing with binge drinking by creating a safe alcohol zone in the capital. And after 10, online ad fraud, rapidly growing into one of the biggest organised crime businesses behind drug trafficking. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And we are funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast. This forecast takes us through to midnight tomorrow, Thursday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Gisborne. Cloudy periods, a few light showers. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui and North Taranaki. Fine spells. Could be a light shower or two from tomorrow afternoon. South Taranaki and Taihape through to Wellington. Also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mainly fine and warm, but isolated showers inland this afternoon about now and this evening. Some possibly heavy clouds. cloud increases tomorrow evening. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland mainly fine today, but isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. A few showers tomorrow, turning to rain from evening. Heavy falls about Westland and Fiordland tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland mainly fine. However, isolated showers inland about now and this evening. Some heavy with thunderstorms. Localised downpours south of Fairlie. Areas of coastal fog south of Timaru in the morning. Fine at the Chathams. It's nearly 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks so much. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. It's being described as the deadliest terror attack in New York since September 11, 2001. A man drove a pickup truck down a crowded bike path along the Hudson River in Manhattan, killing 8 people and injuring 11 before being shot by a police officer. He survived that shooting and is now in hospital. The rampage ended when 29-year-old Sayfullah Saipov smashed into a school bus, jumped out of his truck and ran up and down the highway waving a gun in an attack that he claims by a letter left in his truck was inspired by Islamic State. The BBC's Nick Bryant is in New York.
A riverside bike path in lower Manhattan, where cyclists were mown down by a vehicle which appears to have deliberately mounted the curb. Eyewitnesses described a white pickup truck being driven at high speed. The path was scattered with damaged bikes and injured riders. Moments afterwards, the truck appears to have rammed another vehicle outside one of New York's most prestigious schools. Pupils at the school told us how gunfire then erupted.
Yeah, he was running around like with a gun. And so police from Stye came out and then like people called the cops and so they were coming in. And the guy fired a couple shots before and then there was like a shootout between like the police and the guy. And that's when they started to close down everything and we had to go.
And he was screaming in the street. He looked frustrated, panicked, confused. From there, a whole bunch of customers started running past me. A whole bunch of people came running past my way, yelling, "He's got a gun, he's got a gun."
Officer, clear him out. Let's go.
Police cleared some of Manhattan's busiest streets. And on the police scanner, the panic of the moment.
Central, be advised, we have multiple people on the ground from Chambers all the way up to Houston. All the way from Houston to Chambers. There's multiple people on the ground, Central. We need buses from Houston all the way down to Chambers.
All this unfolded within the shadow of the New World Trade Center, where New Yorkers are reminded daily of the ever-present threat of terror. This is one of the most heavily policed areas in the whole of the United States. We are just yards from ground zero. And the emergency services were here in heavy numbers almost immediately. And it didn't take them long to confirm that New York City had again been the target of terror.
It's a very painful day in our city. Horrible tragedy on the west side. Let me be clear that based on the information we have at this moment, this was an act of terror and a particularly cowardly act of terror aimed at innocent civilians, aimed at people going about their lives who had no idea of what was about to hit them.
I think I have any more in the trunk.
Once again, New York has been attacked on a beautiful autumn day and just yards from one of its most sacred and one of its most fortified sites.
That's the BBC's Nick Bryant in New York. If you are in Auckland tonight on the southwestern motorway and you're wondering what on earth is going on, traffic is basically stationary, we understand, in one part. Well, Auckland traffic updates tell us that there is a multi-car crash after Portage Road, blocking the left lane, causing delays all the way back to Wormsley Road. Patience is being urged if you are heading in that direction and you can avoid it. Please do so. That's on the southwestern in Auckland. Zan Tarapata believed God commanded him to kill 2 men at the Easy Cash pawn shop, his lawyers say. Paranoid and suffering from schizophrenia, Mr. Tarapata wrongly believed his partner was having sex with his father, his friend and the 2 men she worked with at the Takanini shop in South Auckland or Southern Auckland. Mr. Tarapata has pleaded not guilty to murdering Paul Fanning and Paul Matthews by reason of insanity and is on trial at the High Court in Auckland. Our court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Julia Spellman, a lawyer for Mr. Tarapata, opened the defence case today, saying 3 mental health experts agree he was suffering what the experts refer to as a disease of the mind at the time of the killing.
He was deeply, deeply unwell. He was suffering from schizophrenia to such an extent that he did not understand that what he was doing was morally wrong. He thought what he was doing was morally right.
Jeremy Skipworth is the clinical director of the Mason Clinic, Auckland's forensic psychiatry unit, and interviewed Mr Tarapata on 2 occasions. He said in the lead up to the killings in July 2014, Mr Tarapata carried a knife for protection, believing his life and those of his family were at risk.
He required that his children sleep with his partner, and he slept beside the bed in order to protect them and keep them safe. He felt that he had to stay up at night, stay awake all night so that he could make sure that they wouldn't be killed. These are all examples of his paranoid behaviour.
Zaan Tarapata also had strong religious fixations.
He would go and purchase lamb, he would burn it, and he would pray to God to receive directions.
Mr Tarapata would also spend hours reading his Bible, believing that God was sending him directions.
Some of those directions came to him directly through the Bible, through his reading of the scripture. Other directions and information he received directly from God through command.
One of those commands was to kill Paul Fanning and Paul Matthews because he wrongly believed they were having sex with his partner.
He did not appreciate at the time that killing Paul Matthews and Paul Fanning could possibly have been immoral because God had told him to do so.
Dr Skipworth said an expert for the Crown would say Mr Tarapata knew what he was doing was morally wrong, but the doctor said the Crown's argument that Mr Tarapata was acting out of anger and jealousy didn't mean he could distinguish right from wrong. He also acknowledged that Mr Tarapata had made some attempts to get rid of bloodied clothing and his knives, but again, that didn't mean he was sane.
What was he to do? He had some awareness of the law. He was being told by God to kill. And I think he regarded God as being the highest moral authority and an authority higher than the law and one which he should follow.
Under cross-examination, the Crown prosecutor Richard Marchant pointed out that Mr Tarapata was willing to talk to police about mundane topics such as sport, but would not talk to the police about the killings. Dr Skipworth said within days of the killings, Mr Tarapata had a 40-minute consultation with a psychiatric nurse and uttered just 4 words during that time. He said the silence could be because of the psychiatric episode that he was going through. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gayahau.
16 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint, 16 minutes past 6 now on Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was with CNN. She's given her first major international TV interview to a global news network, CNN, in a wide-ranging conversation with host Christiane Amanpour. Not bad being interviewed by her. She said issues like climate change, child poverty, inequality and housing affordability were acute for New Zealand. Asked if she felt a historical burden being a woman in power at what seemed to be a key moment in history for women. Ms Ardern said she had some great former female role models, so some great female role models and former Prime Ministers, Jenny Shipley and Helen Clark. Let's listen to some of their conversation.
We do have challenges, however, that we will tackle under my leadership, including the gender pay gap in New Zealand, which is acute, but also issues of domestic and sexual violence, a particular issue for us, as well as our representation across board level in the private sector, but also in politics as well. We've started with a goal of making sure that within our party we have 50% women represented in Parliament. We've almost hit that goal this election, but we'll continue to make sure that we lead as we would have others demonstrate what we need to achieve when it comes to women's representation.
You're a self-confessed policy geek. I want to ask you on the international agenda, because President Trump is coming over to your region, to Asia. North Korea has said again that it may make a, above-air nuclear test. There are obviously real tensions in your region. What do you expect from the Trump trip, and what would you say to the president? What is the region thinking about how this is going to be resolved?
I think probably from at least New Zealand's perspective, the strong message we would send is that it's never too late to talk. We are staunchly nuclear free and continue to promote nuclear non-proliferation. That is a message we'll continue to send on the international stage, whilst at the same time really encouraging the use of the multilateral environment to make sure that we continue that dialogue and encourage that dialogue. It's of critical importance to our region.
And can I ask you, you made a a statement today, the government made a statement today that they would consider offering climate refugee status to certain people around the world. Tell me what exactly that means, and that's really doubling down on your commitment to the environment.
I think that's acknowledging that we are Pacific neighbours and friends, and that areas like Kiribati, for instance, is already experiencing rising sea levels. We need to acknowledge that we are, unless we make dramatic changes, at the front of seeing refugees as a result of climate change. And so we see a duty of care there, both to champion internationally the importance of acknowledging and responding to climate change, but also doing our bit. We, of course, have a refugee quota around the number of UN-mandated refugees we take. We also have a number of programs already with the Pacific. We're looking to ways to build in the responsibility we have on climate change in the way that we approach potentially climate change refugees in the future amongst our neighbours.
Jacinda Ardern talking to Christiane Amanpour on CNN. Absolutely fascinating to see the sort of coverage Jacinda Ardern is getting in foreign media, particularly English language broadsheets. A lot of words in The Guardian, for example. If you're interested, just do, go to The Guardian and search Jacinda Ardern. New York Times, Washington Post, all of them have been interested in her elevation to the position of Prime Minister in New Zealand, some of them without much in the way of historical context and possibly not the recognition that she is the third female Prime Minister of New Zealand. It's 6:20. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. The Australian government is seemingly unmoved by the dire situation on Manus Island, where 600 male asylum seekers are refusing to vacate the now officially closed detention centre. The power's off, the water is disconnected, and there is no food left. The men say they fear violence and attacks from locals and won't move to alternative accommodation in a community that is known to simply not want them there and is sometimes not held back in expressing those opinions. The PNG military have now taken back control of the centre, and that's another concern given the PNG Army's past attitude to the detainees. However, commanders on Manus say they have not yet been ordered to forcibly remove the men. Acting Australian Prime Minister Julie Bishop says that Papua New Guinea is a sovereign state, but she's refused to say whether the men are safe from harm. This is obviously a very big story in both Australia and PNG. The ABC's Sarah White looks at this for us.
Julie Bishop said the safety of the men was up to PNG.
Papua New Guinea is a sovereign government of a population of over 8 million people. They're responsible for law and order and for security. We inherited this caseload of people claiming asylum status. Some of them have been found to not be refugees and some have been found to be genuine refugees. We're working on resettlement options for those who are found to be genuine refugees, and that includes resettlement in Papua New Guinea, but there's also other alternatives like the United States. Those who have been found not to be refugees should go home. So there are resettlement options available.
Ms Bishop also encouraged the men to leave the detention centre.
It makes no sense for these people to remain on Manus Island because the essential services have been transferred to alternative accommodation. So I urge them to go to the alternative accommodation where there will be food, water, electricity and medical services.
But how long these services will be made available to the asylum seekers isn't certain. The Secretary of Immigration, Michael Pizzulo, told Senate estimates his department would provide accommodation, meals and medical services, but only until these men had been resettled. And in an email provided by the Office of Immigration Minister Peter Dutton, they said the accommodation was safe and secure. But Director of Human Rights Watch Elaine Pearson says that's not good enough.
As long as those men remain on Manus Island, there's going to be more attacks, there's going to be more violence, and this is going to be a headache for the Australian government. It's not like these violent attacks happen every single day. It might not happen tomorrow, it might not happen next week, but we're very concerned that there are these young groups of men on Manus who have been preying on refugees and see them as easy targets. So I think we absolutely will see more violent attacks, and we're very concerned that the police have failed to investigate these attacks and that the medical care on the island is really not suitable for these refugees and asylum seekers when the attacks happen.
Politically, the closure has also caused anger by some in other major parties. Labor MP Susan Templeman tweeted, "What's happening right now on Manus Island is deeply disturbing and completely unacceptable. It always has been." And the Greens Party Nick McKim, who was on Manus Island, had this to say about Peter Dutton.
He is a racist, a proven liar, a fascist and a serial human rights abuser, and it's a badge of honour to be personally attacked by Peter Dutton, and I'm just taking it as confirmation that I'm on the right track. And what I would say to Mr Dutton or anyone else is I'm actually the one here on the ground. I've seen the photos taken yesterday of that facility and it is not ready, and I'm prepared to stake my political credibility any time against the credibility of a monster like Peter Dutton.
That report from the ABC. Speaking of reports from Australia, just a report coming in that Uluru, also known of course as Ayers Rock, that climbing will be banned on it from 2019. Climbing on Australia's iconic Uluru landmark will be banned from October 2019. Local authorities have just confirmed that report. Actually, you can actually read that report on RNZ's website, the World's website. That just in from Australia. Justin from Wellington, feedback from Newtown, where a resident says, where we live you hear more noise from the zoo, daycare centres and council flats than the bowls club. There's even a gun range behind the zoo. Surely the council have better things to do. That's in response to Charlie Juver's story just before 6 o'clock, that the bowls club is so noisy they're clinging to their tenancy. They may be biffed out and replaced with a dog training school. Yep, that's not the case. This nearby resident said there are lots of things around that are noisier than the bowls club. Thank you for your feedback. You can always text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. 25 minutes past 6, almost time for the program to come to an end. But finally tonight, questions have been raised about the story of 2 sailors rescued after being lost at sea for 5 months. So they say. After it was revealed the pair had an emergency locator beacon on board that they chose not to activate. Jennifer Appel and Natasha Fuiava and their 2 dogs were rescued in the Pacific Ocean last week after claiming that they were adrift for 5 months. Great story, but some of it, Zach Fleming reports it's now, well, people are scratching their heads a little bit.
An elated Jennifer Appel speaking after she and her partner were rescued by the US Navy after 5 months adrift at sea.
When we saw you guys coming over the horizon, it was like, oh God, we've been saved. It was the most amazing feeling because we honestly did not believe that we would survive another 24 hours in the current situation. We had no idea what to expect, but when we saw that big gray ship coming, it was just relief. It was.
Appel, her friend Natasha Fuiava and their 2 dogs set off from Hawaii in May on an 18-day sail to Tahiti. But the pair told rescuers a 3-day storm which struck the day after they left damaged the mast and engine of their 15-metre boat, Sea Nymph.
And the storm had dropped copious amounts of water, and it flooded the cockpit, which actually ended up flooding the ignition and the starter for the boat.
Appel and Fuiava claimed the storm also knocked out their communications equipment.
So we no longer had that ability to start the motor. And we got pushed into what's called the Devil's Triangle. It is an area 160 west and about 0 degrees at the equator, where boats go in, but they very rarely come out. And if they do, there are no people on them. And we learned that that was a tiger shark location. And the tiger sharks figured that we had entered their living room and we were not leaving fast enough.
But here's where the story begins to get murky. The National Weather Service in Honolulu has no record of a storm near Hawaii in early May. Instead of turning around, the pair continued sailing towards Tahiti, drifting hundreds of kilometres off course. They told rescuers several boats passed them, ignoring their calls for help. They said they came close to Wake Island and Kiribati, but decided it would be too dangerous to stop. Jennifer says they then became desperate, believing they had just days to live, despite having enough food on board to last a year.
And we had been told by people who had sailed this route before that you could run into some serious problems, and if we thought we only needed a month of food to pack 3, and we figured we might need 3 months of food, so we packed at least 6. We had dry goods.
Yes.
We found that cans don't work. So beef jerky, oatmeal, rice, pasta, dried fruits, nuts. Pretty much a vegan and vegetarian diet is what we survived on.
Yes.
We did run out of dog food, and the dogs turned out to really like human food.
The couple was picked up last week in good health, almost 1,500 kilometres from Japan. The US Coast Guard says if the emergency locator beacon had been activated, the woman would have been rescued immediately. Apple and Fuiava say they're now homeless, and everything they owned was on their stricken yacht. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Feedback on Manus Island. The Australian government and Australian people should be ashamed of what they've done to these people. They have bribed other countries, desperate for money to take these people and strip them of their human rights. They have suffered horrific treatment at the hands of thugs and brutes paid with Australian money. Shame, shame, Australia, says Victoria. And just a shout out to a regular listener. We have listeners all around the world, particularly when big things happen. On the night that the government was being announced, Winston Peters said he was going with Labor. We were hearing from people far and wide. But one of our regular listeners is David Crawford, who is in Raleigh, North Carolina. Sometimes he listens to us by shortwave. Is it shortwave? Tonight he's listening to us via streaming on the internet. David, we're delighted to have you with us, and wherever you are joining us from in New Zealand or the world, thank you for being with us. That is Checkpoint for tonight. On behalf of our excellent and hard-working team, we'll be back tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Uzbeki man who drove a rented truck into cyclists and pedestrians in New York, killing 8 people, is tonight under police guard in hospital. Authorities say they've dismantled the drug syndicate which tried to smuggle $20 million worth of cocaine into Tauranga last night. More than 100 staff from the high-end Auckland grocery chain Nosh are still owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid wages. And Australian Senate Liberal President Stephen Parry has sensationally quit tonight after advice from the British Home Office that he's a dual citizen. Our next news and weather is at 7.
What are you supposed to be?
Everyone's talking about the new moving book. What are you supposed to be? It's in the RNZ treasure chest of kids' stories on the RNZ website. It's delightful and funny and moving. You really don't want to be left wondering what all the fuss is about. So check it out and have all your questions answered. You'll growl with delight.
Grrr!